If you could, just relive your life over and over again, like correcting every single mistake, avoiding every tragedy, just dodging every bullet, would you actually end up with a perfect life?
Right, or would you just end up with, an entirely different, maybe even more agonizing set of heartbreaks?
Exactly. I mean, take a second and really think about that. Because if you could rewind to your absolute worst regret and just choose the other path, do you really think the universe would just let you get away with it?
It's basically the ultimate human fantasy, isn't it? I mean, everyone listening to us right now has that one moment they wish they could do over.
Oh, totally.
We all lie awake at 3 a.m. agonizing over, a harsh word we said or missed career opportunity or just a wrong turn. But when you actually play that fantasy out to its logical conclusion, the implications are just staggering.
Yeah, because if you pull on one thread, the whole tapestry warps.
Exactly. And sometimes the new picture you weave is, well, it's far more terrifying than the one you started with.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are stepping into the incredibly mesmerizing, totally time-bending, and honestly just mind-altering world of British author Kate Atkinson.
It is quite a world.
It really is. We are going to explore the profound questions raised by two of her most acclaimed Costa Book Award-winning companion novels. So we're looking at Life After Life, which came out in 2013, and its companion piece, A God in Ruins from 2015.
And just to be clear, to unpack all of this, we aren't just relying on our own reading. We have pulled together a massive, really fascinating stack of sources for you today.
We really went down the rabbit hole for this one, didn't we?
Oh, completely. We are looking at this brilliant academic paper out of Purdue University that frames these novels through the lens of feminist resilience.
Right.
And we've got literary critiques from The Guardian, deep dive analyses of the 2022 BBC television adaptation from the spin-off. We've got these intricate schmoop timelines mapping out all the alternate realities.
Which are so helpful, by the way.
So helpful. We also have reading group guides and some incredibly spirited, highly contentious debates from readers on Goodreads who are, frankly, still trying to untangle the philosophy of these books.
Yeah, the Goodreads threads are intense. So our mission today is to take all these disparate sources and figure out what Atkinson is actually trying to tell us about fate. We're going to explore how trauma lives physically in the body, test the reality of the butterfly effect against the crushing weight of history, and really look at the sheer unmatched power of fiction to rewrite reality.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. So if you are listening to this on your commute or, while walking the dog, prepare yourself because time is about to get very, very loopy. And it all begins with a baby who dies before she even takes her first breath, only to be born again.
Right. So let's set the scene. February 11, 1910, a snowy English country home called Fox Corner. This is the birth of our protagonist, Ursula Todd.
And in her very first iteration, the delivery just goes tragically wrong.
Yeah, Atkinson really doesn't shy away from the brutality of early 20th century childbirth. The local doctor, Dr. Fellows, is delayed by the heavy snow. The umbilical cord is wrapped tightly around the baby's neck.
Which is just terrifying.
It is, and the family panics. They cannot locate a pair of surgical scissors in time. The Guardian review we looked at actually highlights this stark, devastating quote from the novel. It says, "The little heart stops like a bird dropped from the sky. Darkness falls. She dies."
But then, and this is where it gets crazy, the universe hiccups. The loop resets.
Right back to the start.
Exactly. We are back on that exact same snowy night. The mother, Sylvie, is in labor again. But this time, a tiny, seemingly inconsequential adjustment happens in the mechanics of the universe.
The doctor actually arrives.
Yes. The doctor makes it. He manages to cut the cord. The family is so relieved they give him his customary jar of pickle as a reward. And Ursula lives.
She lives, but, the reprieve is so temporary. What the timeline sources from Schmoop map out in this granular detail is that Ursula's survival is incredibly tenuous.
Yeah, she does not have it easy.
Not at all. This is where Atkinson's premise truly takes hold. Ursula continually dies in subsequent lives in ways that range from the bizarrely tragic to the agonizingly mundane.
Like the beach incident.
Right. She wades into the ocean in Cornwall on a family holiday and drowns.
So dark.
And in another life, a cat falls asleep on her face in her pram and she suffocates.
Oh my God, the cat one is just...
It's horrifying because it's so ordinary. She climbs out a window trying to retrieve a doll that her brother Maurice recklessly chucked out. She loses her balance and falls to her death.
Just one misstep.
Exactly. She dies from gas inhalation when the power goes out in a London apartment and the pilot light extinguishes while she's taking a nap.
Honestly, reading that timeline is genuinely stressful. It forces you to look around your own house and realize how many mundane objects are just, potential hazards.
It really does.
But then Atkinson introduces a massive macro-level threat,
Yeah.
which is the 1918 Spanish flu.
Oh, this sequence is unbelievable.
The timeline for this in our sources is just wild because we see Ursula iterating through this horrific trial and error process. So the family maid, Bridget, goes out to celebrate Armistice Day in London and brings the flu back to Fox Corner. Ursula dies, darkness falls, reset.
And the next time around, she tries to change the variables.
Right, Ursula somehow instinctively avoids Bridget, but her beloved younger brother Teddy gets sick. So Ursula cares for him, catches the flu, and dies anyway. Reset.
It's like she can't win.
She can't. So next time, Ursula manages to keep Bridget from coming home entirely, but her sister Pamela goes to fetch the maid. Everyone catches it. Everyone dies. Reset.
It becomes this desperate, escalating game of strategy.
It totally does.
Sure.
Ursula deliberately trips Bridget so she sprains her ankle, right? Hoping a physical injury will keep her from going out to the celebration.
But Bridget is stubborn. She goes anyway, catches the flu, brings death back to the house.
So finally, driven to an absolute extreme, Ursula literally pushes Bridget down the stairs, breaking the poor woman's arm, just to incapacitate her enough to absolutely guarantee she cannot go to the armistice celebration.
Which is brutal.
It is. But it works. The family survives.
And the thematic weight of all these deaths is just profound. The literary critics in our sources are very clear that this looping structure isn't just, a clever science fiction gimmick.
Right, it's not just a plot device.
No, it isn't just a dramatic device to keep the reader hooked. It is a deep psychological exploration of how fragile human existence actually is. Every single one of these near deaths or actual death represents the terrifying universal anxieties of parenthood and family life.
Yeah, that anxiety of just, what if I look away for 1 second?
Exactly. Atkinson is highlighting how easily a child or a sibling can be lost to entirely random chance. A snowstorm that delays a doctor, a misplaced pair of scissors, a sleeping cat, an invisible virus carried by a housemaid. It strips away the illusion of control we all desperately cling to.
I kept thinking of it like a video game.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Right, it's like the ultimate save point mechanic. You reach a boss battle, you die, the screen goes red, and you reload right outside the boss's door to try a different strategy. You tell yourself, okay, this time I'll dodge left instead of right.
Yeah, exactly.
But here is where my video game analogy sort of falls apart, and where I think the book gets incredibly complicated. In a game, the player remembers the previous attempts. They have conscious, explicit knowledge of why they are changing their strategy.
They know the mechanics of the fight.
Exactly. But for most of this book, Ursula doesn't explicitly retain her conscious memory of the previous lives. She doesn't have like a spreadsheet in her head mapping out the timelines. So if she doesn't explicitly remember, I struggle to see this as a gift or a superpower. Isn't this just a Sisyphean curse?
That's a huge question.
I mean, she is blindly stumbling through a minefield, getting blown up, and then being placed back at the start line without a map, just hoping she doesn't step on the same explosive twice.
The mechanics of her memory are definitely the central puzzle of the novel, and the sources tackle this head-on. The academic paper from Purdue University by Beatriz Dominguez Garcia provides a really fascinating framework for understanding this.
Okay, what does she say?
She points out that Ursula doesn't navigate that minefield with her conscious, rational thought processes. The memories are not stored in her frontal lobe. Instead, the memories are stored in her physical body. The academic term for this is embodied memory.
Oh, so it's the idea that the body keeps the score. Like the trauma bypasses the intellect entirely and just settles into the nervous system.
That is exactly it. Ursula experiences these profound, overwhelming episodes of déjà vu. Her body sends her urgent physical warnings that her mind simply cannot decipher.
Like what kind of warnings?
Well, her heart will suddenly start knocking wildly in her chest, or she'll feel a shadow of a thrill or sudden unexplained terror like a dark thunderstorm rolling over her brain. Yeah, she doesn't consciously know why she feels a suffocating dread when she looks at the ocean in Cornwall. She doesn't consciously know why she feels an absolute imperative to keep the maid away on Armistice Day. But her somatic nervous system physically reacts to the impending hazard. Her body remembers the drowning. Her body remembers the suffocation of the flu.
That framing completely changes how you read the darker sections of the book.
Oh, absolutely.
And it leads us into the most difficult, harrowing parts of her looping life, which the Purdue paper analyzes specifically through the lens of gender violence and resilience.
Yeah.
Because the minefield Ursula is navigating isn't just made up of natural disasters, viruses, and accidents.
No, the real danger is much closer to home.
Right. The most dangerous explosives in her life are the social structures of the patriarchal society she's born into.
The paper meticulously details this tragically repetitive loop centered around Ursula's 16th birthday. And honestly, it's a sequence that is incredibly hard to read.
It is. It's brutal.
She is raped by Howie, who is a friend of her older brother, Maurice. And the assault itself is horrifying, but the aftermath provides a devastating portrait of systemic vulnerability.
Yeah, the mother's reaction is just, it's sickening.
When Ursula tries to process what happened, her own mother, Sylvie, essentially victim blames her. Sylvie's immediate concern is not her daughter's trauma, but her daughter's physical purity. Sylvie interrogates her about her maidenhood, asking point blank if she's still intact.
That word intact is just chilling to me.
It really is.
It treats a human being like a piece of property, like a vase that has been dropped. If it's chipped, it loses its market value. And Sylvie's reaction effectively seals Ursula's fate in that specific timeline, doesn't it?
It completely strips Ursula of her autonomy and her identity. Because she is no longer intact, society offers her no protection and no viable path forward. This leads to just a horrific cascade of events.
Right, the pregnancy.
Yes, she experiences an unwanted pregnancy. She is sent away to her chaotic, bohemian Aunt Izzy, who arranges a desperate, near-fatal back-alley abortion.
Which is incredibly traumatic on its own.
Exactly. And eventually, isolated and traumatized, Ursula falls into a desperate marriage to a man named Derek. Derek turns out to be horribly abusive, isolating her further, and eventually, he murders her.
Oh my God.
Darkness falls, reset.
And then we get a do-over. And this sequence is where the Purdue paper's analysis of resilience completely shifted my understanding of what Atkinson is doing here. Because in the subsequent life, the setup is identical. It's her 16th birthday, the same environment, the same vulnerability, Howie approaches her.
But this time, a tiny variation occurs.
Right. Howie gets defensive and dismissively says to her, "It wasn't like I was trying to rape you or anything."
And that single word acts as the catalyst. Hearing the specific, brutal word rape triggers her embodied memory. Dominguez Garcia points out a brilliant nuance here. Instead of shrinking away, or blushing, or accepting his minimization of the threat, Ursula reclaims the word.
She takes its power back.
Exactly. The text describes her feeling a sudden possession of the word. Her body recognizes the immense existential danger it represents. She feels the physical dread. She avoids the shrubbery where the assault happened in the previous iteration, and she simply walks away. She entirely breaks that specific cycle of victimization.
The academic argument being that Atkinson locates resilience not in mental fortitude, but in the physical body itself. But, I have to push back on the broader implications of this.
Okay, how so?
Well, this totally contradicts how modern psychology usually defines resilience. We usually think of resilience as bouncing back, right? The classic rubber band metaphor. You endure hardship, you stretch, maybe you fray a little, but you process it, you go to therapy, you find meaning in the pain, and eventually you recover your original shape.
But the rubber band implies that the structure you are bouncing back into is safe.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. And here, Atkinson seems to be arguing something incredibly dark about the early 20th century. She seems to be saying that the rubber band model doesn't work for these vulnerable female characters. True resilience for Ursula requires a complete, literal regeneration.
Because the world isn't safe for her.
Right. She cannot heal from the trauma of the assault, the abortion, and the abusive marriage within that society. She has to physically die and reset the universe to escape systemic patriarchal violence. That is a bleak indictment. Is Atkinson implying that society is so fundamentally broken, so inherently dangerous for women, that a magical, impossible do-over is the only true escape from victimization?
Dominguez Garcia's paper suggests that this is precisely Atkinson's critique. By forcing Ursula to literally die in order to escape her abuser, the novel exposes the absolute powerlessness of women in that era.
Yeah, it's a structural trap.
Completely. The social structures, which are represented by her mother's obsession with chastity, the total lack of legal recourse for marital abuse, the absolute absence of options for a ruined woman, they are so rigid that survival within them, once you step off the prescribed path, is nearly impossible.
You're just doomed.
You can't bounce back if the world gives you no ground to bounce on. So Ursula's resilience is her regeneration. Her ultimate empowerment comes only when she learns to trust her body's visceral warnings over the polite, submissive societal rules she's been indoctrinated with.
So she learns to navigate these micro-level domestic minefields. She learns to save herself from the abusive husband. She learns to save Bridget the maid from the flu. She even has an iteration where she averts the murder of a young neighborhood girl named Nancy.
Right, she's mastering her immediate environment.
But as she masters these personal crises, Ursula begins to realize that this inexplicable, terrifying ability she has might not just be for her own personal survival. It might be meant for something much, much larger.
Yeah, the narrative zooms out from the domestic to the global. Ursula is pulled into the gravitational orbit of the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century, World War II.
Her experiences with the war are incredibly varied across her different lives, and it's fascinating how Atkinson uses Ursula to explore almost every facet of the civilian war experience.
It really is a masterclass in shifting perspectives.
It is. In some iterations, she stays in London and works in the air raid precautions department during the Blitz. The Guardian review quotes this harrowing scene where she's caught in a direct bombing. It's just pure sensory overload. People are calling her Susie because she is so concussed she can't remember her own name.
Oh, that scene is so visceral.
She's choking on brick dust and ash, feeling like something inside her core is torn beyond repair. In some of these Blitz timelines, she dies crushed in the rubble. In others, she survives, spending her nights desperately digging people, and in one very touching instance, a dog out from under collapsed building.
The London Blitz timelines are harrowing, but Atkinson also forces Ursula into an entirely different perspective. There is an iteration where she actually ends up on the opposing side of the conflict.
Yeah, the Germany timeline.
She marries a German man named Jürgen in 1934, moves to Germany, and gets trapped in Berlin as the war breaks out. She experiences the devastating Allied bombing campaigns from the ground.
And the desperation there is just unbearable.
In that specific timeline, facing absolute starvation, the total collapse of civil society, and the encroaching Soviet army, she makes the unimaginable choice to commit suicide with her young daughter, Frida, using chemist pills.
Oh, man.
It is a grueling, unapologetic look at the universality of civilian suffering. The bombs fall the same way, whether you were in London or Berlin.
It's devastating. But the timeline that really captures everyone's imagination, the one that actually opens the book in a flash forward and frames the entire narrative, is the timeline where Ursula decides she is going to stop the bombs from ever falling. She decides she is going to assassinate Adolf Hitler.
It is the ultimate moral trolley problem, actualized.
Yes.
Relying entirely on her accumulated, intense déjà vu from her previous lives, she travels to Germany in 1930. She knows, somehow through the echoes of her past deaths, that she needs to befriend a young, relatively obscure shop girl in Munich named Eva Braun.
Which is just such a wild historical integration.
It really is. Through Eva, she infiltrates Hitler's inner circle. She walks into a Munich cafe with her father's Great War Service revolver hidden in her bag. She pulls it out, points it at Hitler, pulls the trigger, and is immediately gunned down by his SS guards. Darkness falls, reset.
And this specific moment is where the Goodreads reader debates in our sources absolutely lose their minds. I spent a long time reading through these comment threads, and readers are deeply, fiercely divided and confused by this opening.
I can imagine. It's a very provocative opening.
Did she actually alter history? Because here's the trick of the book. Atkinson never explicitly shows us a timeline where World War II doesn't happen. We never get to see the utopia Ursula supposedly created.
The ambiguity is completely intentional. The Goodreads debates highlight two distinct philosophical camps here. As one user, Becky, astutely points out, the mechanics of Ursula's power make the outcome irrelevant to her own experience.
Wait, irrelevant how?
Because it doesn't matter if the bullet struck Hitler's heart or missed entirely, because the instant she is shot by the SS, she dies. And the absolute rule of her existence is that when she dies, her conscious experience ends, the loop resets, and she is born again in 1910.
Oh, I see.
Even if she saved millions of lives in that specific timeline, she never gets to live in that peaceful world. History resets for her regardless.
But there is a deeper philosophical problem here, which another user, Ningen, brings up. Ningen points to a specific throwaway line from Ursula herself later in the book, where she is musing about the nature of time. Ursula wonders that even if she killed Hitler, perhaps Göring or Himmler would have stepped in, and everything would have happened in just the same way.
That line is so crucial. It introduces the concept of historical fatalism. It's a direct challenge to the great man theory of history, which argues that history is shaped by the sheer will of exceptional individuals.
Right.
Atkinson is flirting with the idea that history has a momentum of its own, driven by massive geopolitical, economic, and social forces that operate entirely independent of single individuals.
This clashes so hard with the science fiction tropes we were used to. It's the butterfly effect, right? The idea that a time traveler steps on a prehistoric bug and millions of years later, the sky is green and dogs are the dominant species.
Exactly, the tiny ripple that changes the world.
Every tiny action is supposed to ripple outward and change everything. But Atkinson seems to be arguing the exact opposite. If the butterfly effect is true, killing Hitler changes the 20th century entirely. But if historical fatalism is true, history is more like a massive, raging river.
I like that analogy.
You can throw a giant boulder into it, like assassinating a dictator, and there might be a temporary splash, a momentary disruption of the water. But the current of human nature, of post-World War I resentment, of economic depression, is so incredibly strong that the water just flows around the boulder and eventually reaches the exact same bloody ocean.
It just absorbs the change.
Yeah. So, reading through these sources, what is Atkinson's ultimate verdict? In her universe, does individual action actually matter at all on a macro scale? Or are we all just trapped in the river?
If the river of history is truly unchangeable, then Ursula's endless looping, her suffering, and her sacrifice in that Munich cafe feel incredibly futile. It borders on nihilism.
It really does. It feels hopeless.
But the sources suggest Atkinson offers a different, more intimate kind of hope. Individual action might not be able to dismantle the massive geopolitical machinery of a world war. The current might indeed be too strong, but individual action can change the microcurrents. It can save a single life.
Because of Teddy.
Exactly, because in one of her final, most stable iterations, while she may not stop the war, she does manage to alter the immediate circumstances enough to save the life of her beloved younger brother, Teddy, a bomber pilot who is shot down. She manages to ensure he survives the war.
Teddy surviving is the emotional climax. It feels like the ultimate victory. Which makes transitioning to the second book in our stack of sources an absolute gut punch.
Oh, it really is.
Because in 2015, Atkinson published the companion novel, A God in Ruins. And looking at the extensive summaries and critical reception of this book, it turns absolutely everything we just talked about completely upside down. It recontextualizes Ursula's entire victory.
A God in Ruins is a brilliant piece of literary misdirection. Atkinson is very explicit in her author's note that this is not a sequel. You don't need to read Life After Life to understand it, but reading them together creates a profound dialogue.
How so?
Well, while the first book spans half a century, multiple timelines, and endless permutations, the second book focuses largely on Teddy Todd's singular experience within World War II, and then his linear, unlooping life after it. We follow the Teddy that Ursula supposedly saved.
And Teddy's war experience is the stuff of nightmares. He is a Royal Air Force Halifax bomber pilot.
And the survival rates for those crews were just
horrifyingly low. Teddy is acutely aware that the odds of surviving his required tour of duty are practically zero. There's a devastating quote from the text that perfectly encapsulates the fatalism of those young men. Teddy compares the pilots to birds thrown against a wall in the hope that eventually, if there were enough birds, they would break that wall.
And it's just heartbreaking.
He doesn't expect to survive. He considers himself a ghost already. But against all odds, he miraculously survives the war and returns home.
He returns, but the life he returns to is fundamentally disappointing. It's a stark, gray contrast to the golden, idyllic childhood he remembers at Fox Corner before the wars. The novel painstakingly details his post-war existence.
Right, he marries Nancy.
He marries his childhood sweetheart, Nancy. The same Nancy that Ursula saved from being murdered in the first book, actually. They settle down, they have a daughter named Viola. It seems like the peaceful life he fought for.
But it's not.
No. Tragedy creeps in. Nancy develops terminal brain cancer. The disease strips away her dignity and her mind, and in a deeply traumatic sequence, she forces Teddy to help her end her life.
And Viola sees it, right?
Yes, it's an agonizing moment, made worse by the fact that young Viola secretly witnesses it.
Their trauma of that moment shatters the family entirely, and Teddy's life just continues to degrade. He gives up his passions. He used to write poetry. He used to take long, observant nature walks. He abandons all of it.
He just fades.
He becomes a very ordinary, unfulfilled suburban teacher. His daughter Viola grows up to absolutely despise him, becoming a bitter, difficult woman who never forgives him for her mother's death. He eventually ends up frail, alone, and patronized in a sheltered housing facility. It is a relentlessly sad, unremarkable, gray existence. You spent hundreds of pages watching this sweet boy from the first book endure decades of quiet desperation.
The reader endures all of that alongside Teddy. We really feel the weight of his long, sad life. But then in the final pages of the novel, as Teddy is in his old age, looking back on everything, Atkinson delivers what literary critic James Walton called one of the most devastating twists in recent fiction.
The ultimate bait and switch. I remember reading the plot summary and having to reread the paragraph 3 times to make sure I understood it.
The twist recontextualizes the entire 400-page novel. We learn that Teddy didn't survive the war. Yeah. On his final flight over Germany, his Halifax bomber was severely damaged and going down. In his final moments, Teddy handed his parachute to his bomb aimer, ordered him to jump, and Teddy stayed at the controls, going down with the burning plane.
Oh my goodness.
Everything the reader just experienced, his marriage to Nancy, Viola's birth, the brain cancer, the suburban teaching job, the sheltered housing, the decades of quiet misery, none of it actually happened. It was entirely imagined.
I have to be honest. If I had invested in reading a 400-page biography of a man's life, enduring his miseries and his heartbreaks, only to be told in the last chapter that it was essentially an illusion, I would feel incredibly frustrated.
That's a very common reaction.
It feels like a violation of the reader's trust. Why would an author punish the reader by making us live through his miserable, mundane post-war life if it wasn't real? What is the narrative purpose of that deception?
To understand the brilliance of that choice, we have to look at the literary analysis provided by Barbara Wheatley in our sources. She points out that life after life and a God in ruins are structurally precise mirror images of each other.
Oh, yeah, so.
Think about the symmetry. In the first book, Teddy dies in combat, but is miraculously resurrected by Ursula's timeline meddling. Ursula and Nancy get their happy ending with him, but in the second book, Teddy appears to live a long, full life, only for us to realize he actually died a heroic death in his youth.
Wheatley compares Teddy's trajectory to the Greek myth of Achilles, right? That completely changes the framing of his sacrifice.
It does. In Greek mythology, Achilles' mother foretold that her son had two possible fates. He could either gain eternal glory and die young on the battlefield of Troy, or he could choose not to fight and live a long, uneventful, obscure life, eventually being forgotten.
The classic hero's dilemma.
Exactly. Teddy, in a very real way, faces the same choice. And by dying young, by choosing the heroic sacrifice of handing over his parachute, he actually spares Nancy.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought of it like that.
He leaves Nancy to grieve his death, yes, which is tragic, but by dying in the war, he spares her from ever developing that agonizing brain tumor decades later. He spares himself from a life of quiet desperation, the loss of his poetry, and the pain of raising a daughter who hates him. His death is an act of ultimate preservation.
Preserving the memory.
Yes, he preserves the golden memory of their youth by refusing to let it decay into the gray misery of the post-war years.
So he sacrifices his future to save the people he loves from the pain that future would inevitably hold. It's a tragic kind of grace. But that still doesn't fully answer my frustration as a reader. Why make us read the illusion? Why meticulously construct Viola's bitter personality and Nancy's medical decline if none of it exists?
Atkinson addresses this directly in her author's note, which is heavily cited in the Wikipedia and critical sources. She writes, "All novels are not only fiction, they are about fiction too. The entire book, the entire illusion is a monument to the power of imagination and art."
So the book itself is the point.
Exactly. We see this meta-commentary throughout the narrative itself. Ursula and Teddy's Aunt Izzy writes a series of wildly popular but somewhat annoying children's books based on a thinly disguised, highly romanticized version of Teddy called Augustus.
Right.
And even the imaginary daughter, Viola, grows up to be a novelist, constantly wishing she had asked Teddy more about his war experiences so she could write a respectable war novel.
So the characters within the fiction are using fiction to cope with reality, which means the fictional life we just spent 400 pages reading is the monument. Atkinson built the monument that Viola couldn't.
Exactly that. The book is an elegy. It is a profound act of mourning for the World War II generation, for all the boys who were thrown against the wall and broke, and the boys who never came home to live those mundane, disappointing, beautiful, ordinary lives.
Because history took it from them.
History took away their reality. So Atkinson is offering the only consolation she has, the consolation of fiction. As the novel's incredible last line states, "And when all else is gone, art remains, even Augustus, When reality is destroyed by a bomb, art is the only place where those unlived lives can safely exist.
Art remains. That is such a powerful thesis statement for an author to make, and it provides a perfect bridge to our final topic today, because we have to talk about what happens when this incredibly complex, non-linear, deeply internal literary art is transformed into a completely different medium.
Right, the TV show.
Let's look at the 2022 BBC television adaptation of Life After Life.
Adapting a novel of this structural complexity was a monumental task. I mean, how do you even start?
Right. The four-part series was directed by John Crowley and stars Thomas and Mackenzie's Ursula. And the central challenge, as the spin-off television review in our stack highlights, is a philosophical one. How do you adapt a book that fundamentally refuses to answer its own mysteries?
Because the book doesn't give you a sci-fi explanation for the loop.
Exactly. There is no magical amulet, no cursed bloodline, no scientific experiment gone wrong. It just presents the reality of the loop as a given.
And the TV show has the incredibly difficult job of visualizing the invisible. The spin-off review notes that the adaptation does have to hold the audience's hand a little bit more than the novel did.
Which makes sense for TV.
Yeah, it establishes the premise more overtly in the first episode, using voiceover and clear visual cues. But where the reviewer feels it really succeeds is in its emotional grounding, specifically through Mackenzie's portrayal of Ursula. She plays her not as a time-traveling superhero with a master plan, but as a genuine everywoman.
That performance is the anchor the series desperately needs. Mackenzie has to link all these disparate, contradictory lives together. The beleaguered, abused housewife, the starving expat in Germany, the traumatized wartime rescue worker.
It's a lot for one actor to carry.
The spin-off praises her for capturing the core tragedy of Ursula's existence, showing that while Ursula possessed infinite lives, the women of that era fundamentally possessed very few actual choices.
Right. She can reset the timeline 100 times, but she's still trapped by the economic and social realities of being a woman in the 1920s and 30s.
Exactly. She can't just become a bank CEO or a general in the army.
Yeah.
Her permutations are limited by her gender.
Yeah.
But I want to bring up a specific, fascinating critique from this spin-off review regarding the visual aesthetic.
Oh, about the historical drama look.
Yeah. They mentioned that the show relies heavily on what they call conventional World War II aesthetics, the standard khakis and grays we see in every prestige British historical drama. And they note a specific, recurring visual motif, a scattering of digital snow falling on Ursula's face to mark the transition from one life to the next, which is a clear nod to that first snowy night she died as an infant.
It's a necessary visual shorthand. In television, you need a mechanism to signal a temporal shift to the audience without confusing them.
I totally understand the practical need for it, but let's debate the philosophy of it for a second.
Yeah.
Doesn't adapting a book about infinite unwritten possibilities into a fixed recorded television show ironically destroy the very premise of the novel?
That's an interesting point.
Think about the act of reading. When you read the book, Ursula's faces, the layout of Fox Corner, the terrifying noise of the Blitz, the infinite permutations of her lives, they are boundless in your own imagination. Every reader sees a slightly different version of the novel.
True.
But once it is filmed and broadcast on a screen, the loop is forcibly closed. Ursula only ever has the face of Thomas and Mackenzie. The house only looks like the location scout's choice. She only has the choices that the director explicitly filmed. Does translating this concept to a screen inherently limit the infinite?
That is a brilliant critique of adaptation itself. It gets to the very heart of the difference between the two mediums. Television and film are incredibly effective at capturing immediate visceral emotion.
Right, the sensory experience.
The terror of a bomb dropping, the claustrophobia of a tense conversation in a bad marriage, you feel that in your chest when you watch it. But literature is arguably the only medium that can truly capture the boundless, looping, inherently contradictory imagination Atkinson was aiming for.
Because it's not fixed.
Right. A book allows two opposing truths to exist simultaneously in the reader's mind. Ursula is both dead and alive. Teddy is both an old man and a casualty of war. A fixed image struggles to replicate that quantum state. The television show is a beautiful, emotionally resonant interpretation, but the novel remains the definitive, limitless experience of the concept.
We've covered a massive amount of conceptual ground today.
We really have.
We've journeyed through the infinite looping lives of Ursula Todd and the heartbreaking phantom life of her brother Teddy. We've unpacked the somatic psychology of trauma, how our experiences don't just vanish into the ether, but live inside our physical bodies, sending us signals and warnings even when our conscious minds forget.
That embodied memory is so crucial.
It is. We've debated the grand architecture of time, questioning whether history is an unchangeable river, strong enough to wash away even the assassination of a dictator, or if our individual choices can alter the current. And we've seen how fiction and art act as the ultimate, necessary consolation for the tragedies of reality, giving life to the ghosts of those we've lost.
It is a profound amount of material to synthesize. Ultimately, Atkinson is asking us to look very closely at the fragility and the beauty of our own single, unrepeatable timelines.
Exactly, because while you, the listener, do not get to magically restart your life when you make a mistake, say the wrong thing, or suffer a heartbreak, you are not entirely powerless. You do have the ability to listen to the déjà vu of your own past experiences. You have the ability to learn from the cycles you've survived, to listen to what your body is telling you, to reclaim your agency, and to break your own personal loops.
To close our deep dive today, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought. This is inspired by the philosophical concept of amore fati, the love of one's fate, which was brought up in several of the reading group discussion guides in our sources.
Okay, what is it?
I want you to imagine for a second that Atkinson's premise is actually real. Imagine that you are not currently on your first playthrough of life. Imagine that you are currently living your 10th, your 50th, or maybe your 100th loop.
That is a staggering thought.
Now, consider the implications of that. What if this current life you are living right now, with all of its highly specific flaws, its unhealed heartbreaks, its profound regrets, and its agonizingly mundane Mondays, what if this specific life is actually the best possible version you've managed to achieve so far?
Oh, wow.
What if this is the perfected run? If you knew that to be true, that all the other iterations were worse, how would that change the way you look at your struggles tomorrow morning?